I can have a video camera and I can just have the lens like this, and then I can just see you. But then I can choose to expand the lens and I can see the whole room and I can see everything around me. Well, that's what I like to think about the eternal perspective, that's what the Lord wants us to have, is that backdrop of eternity, so that we know that everything we do and everything we experience has a greater purpose and greater meaning. So as I look back over the painful years, over the confusing years, yes, they were all difficult at the time. Yes, they caused much pain. But to me, every single ounce of that pain is worth it. If even one person can receive hope, because that's what it's all about. It's all about eternity.
Another day, another breath, a shadow of a life, fighting not to feel this pain inside. What can I do? What can I say to make this suffering go away? If you're really here, stay, please don't leave.
Well, we were brought up in a conservative Jewish home, and that's middle of the road. It's not Orthodox, which is the real strict, or it's not Reform, which is more liberal, but it was pretty much the center of the road. And in a conservative synagogue, some of the service would be in English, but a lot of it would be in Hebrew. There was maybe one older Jewish person in the entire town. Town was about 5,000. And so it was very important for them that we would keep up our Jewish identity. So every Friday night, we would get in the car and we would drive 45 minutes to Waterloo, Iowa, where there was a conservative synagogue, and we would go to Shabbat services. And in our family, we always celebrated the Jewish holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover, the traditions of lighting the candles on Shabbat and welcoming in the Sabbath, and the special meals that were prepared for the holidays. And my father did something interesting because he always wanted people to know about the Jewish faith. So whenever we had like a Passover Seder, he would invite maybe the chaplain or the priest or somebody on staff so that they could understand, what a Passover Seder was like. So it was very important for them to keep up celebrating all the holidays. So we did that. I remember feeling, good about, those practices and feeling good about, the religion, but I always had questions because, here we lived in this Christian area and everybody was celebrating Christmas and there was so much joy and they were talking about Jesus. And I thought, wow, why can't we believe in Jesus? Why can't we have a Christmas tree? Why can't I have Santa Claus, So, I remember feeling drawn to that faith. I didn't know why, I didn't know anything about it. But at that time, as a young person, living in this town where we were pretty much the only Jewish people, and I was already feeling different. People took notice of my father's work, and then he was offered to be the superintendent of a very large state mental hospital in Iowa. People knew at the hospital, when he first arrived in 1957, there were 1,100 patients and 500 employees. And he had so much respect that whenever he would walk down a hall or we'd walk down the winding staircase from the superintendent's apartment into the lobby, everybody would stand to their feet just to give my father respect. So he had this patriarchal way about him. But he also had a great sense of humor. He loved comedy. I remember, every Sunday night we would watch the Ed Sullivan Show. We always enjoyed just watching comedy on TV. He always brought his dogs. He loved his dogs. We first had a boxer, and then after the boxer died, we had 2 other Great Danes. He loved them, and they loved him. And that dog would sit in the big leather chair, and if anybody walked in, there was no messing with my father, because that dog would have taken them out. And then there would be movies in the theater. We had a hospital theater, and the patients would be brought into the auditorium, and every Sunday night was movie night. So there was just many memories like that, and fun things that he brought in, and hired music therapists and occupational therapists and art therapists, and the staff would put on talent shows, and I would play in the band. We had a hospital band, and my father always wanted me to sing, so I'd get up on stage and sing, and he played saxophone too, so we played together in the hospital band. So those were really fond memories, actually. It just became a wonderful place to grow up in, and to learn all about how to help people. And I suppose that's where I came by my desire to be in the helping profession, because I could see how well these patients were being treated and how important it was. But he kind of had a formidable appearance, because he oftentimes would have a serious look on his face, and because everybody in the hospital saw him in that way. That was great, but behind closed doors, it was very different. There was the dark side, the more serious side, and sometimes it was hard to know which side you were going to get. Well, my sister is 6 years older than me, and unfortunately, my father was very physically and emotionally abusive to her. We don't even totally understand all the reasons why. One theory is that he always wanted sons. In the Jewish religion, it's very important to have a son, and she was the oldest child, and she certainly was not a son. When we look at his family, on his mother's side, many of them were killed in the Russian pogroms. So obviously she had a lot of anger, and she took her anger out on my father. And my father was obviously very angry because he didn't have a son, so he took his anger out on us. But it just seemed that as her life progressed, he just, I hate to say this term, but he hated her. He even told us he hated her. And to hear your father say, "I hate your sister," is pretty traumatic. He was very, very cruel to her. And some of the events in which he beat her, I saw. And I used to just try to escape, reading books and taking baths and taking long walks and doing everything I could to try to avoid having to see or hear anything. Of course, no one knew about it because it was behind closed doors. And even my mother admitted that she pretty much ignored it or tried to pretend it wasn't happening. I heard, because my room was right next to my sister's, and I would hear the beatings and the yelling and all of that. And it was really hard, because I just remember, when we would walk down those stairs, staff rising to their feet, and I kept thinking to myself, but they don't really know him. They don't really know how mean he can be. And that was really hard. And I think that's when I really started to feel depressed. I loved to read, and I would escape into Nancy Drew and Bobbsey Twin books and spend hours in the bathroom with the door locked. That was the only place I felt safe, because my father would often just walk into our rooms unannounced. So you never really knew what to expect. You never knew what was going to happen. Meals were terrible. Meals were just probably one of the worst memories that I had, because we always had to eat at the exact same time. Breakfast was 7:15, lunch at 12:15, supper at 5:15, on the dot. Everything was run almost like a military, and it was there was yelling at the table all the time. I don't remember happy meals. If you open up your hands like this, on the one hand, you see your father helped thousands of people, and he did so much good. But on the other hand, you can see this very dark side of your father, and you know how he was physically and emotionally abusive. And what you need to do is to be able to put both these hands together and to see him both ways. I would go into, "Oh, he's fine, everything's wonderful," and I would pretend all the dark stuff wasn't happening. But there was a time when I really had to face it and really see things the way they really were. And I carried everything inside, and I carried all the emotions for the family. So I just cried and wept and would write in my diary, "I wish I could die," or "I wish my father could die." It was just a very dark time. And I was already feeling different, let alone living in a mental hospital, being made fun of. So I think all that mixed together just made for a very confused childhood. And I really couldn't sort it out other than trying to deny things and to escape into my world of books. And then my sister, when she actually graduated and she went out east, she first started out in medical, or she was going to become a nurse. That's what my father wanted her to be, but that was not what she wanted to be. So she ended up dropping out of nursing school and decided she wanted to be a social worker. One of the things that I knew about my father was that you don't mix. You know, it's we the Jews and they the Gentiles. You don't mix. You don't have a mixed marriage. You marry a Jewish person. While she was getting her degree in social work, she met a guy. He wasn't Jewish. He came from a Catholic background, and they fell in love, and they decided they were going to get married. And in those days, it was very difficult because, you know, families would disown their kids if they did that. So Esther, when she announced that they were going to get married, my father decided that's it. And he was literally going to disown her, and he did. And he actually told us that we were to have no contact with her. There would be no going to her wedding, no communication whatsoever. Whenever we walked into her room, he would spit. He would never mention her name. We were to never mention her name. It was as though she were dead. And I thought to myself, well, it's one thing for my father to disown her, but do I have to disown her? Is that really fair? I remember having nightmares where she would come to the hospital grounds at the edge of the grounds, and my father would make her go away, and I would just have nightmares after nightmares. And so finally one day I got up tremendous courage to walk into his office. I remember I had to get by the secretary, go into his office and say, Dad, I have to talk to you right now. And I said, I don't think it's fair that I have to disown my sister. And he actually agreed with me. And he said, you're right. I'm going to get you on a plane and let you go out and visit her. And by that time, they had a little boy, because it had been 2.5 years that he disowned them. What a joyous reunion it was, and how wonderful it was to see them. And I asked my sister the question. I said, if Mom and Dad actually accepted you back into the family, would you go back into the family? Would you forgive them? And she said, absolutely, because I would know how much courage it would take for them to invite me back. But when I came back, my father said, don't talk to me about it at all. But then later on, interestingly enough, he came into my room and he said, you know what, I'm a psychiatrist, so you can show me pictures as a psychiatrist. So he didn't want to admit that as a father, he really wanted to see pictures of his daughter, new husband, and son. So as a psychiatrist, I would show him the pictures, and he would look at them, and I could see that he was deeply thinking, you know, as he was looking at the pictures. And I had no idea what he was thinking because he would never tell me, but I kind of saw through it. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if one day they actually accept her back? Another thing that my father agreed to let happen is that following summer, you know, Esther and her husband liked to camp, so they said that they would be willing to drive to Iowa, and there was a camping ground, a really nice camping ground, and they would agree to camp there so that my younger sister and I could go to the camping ground to spend time with them. So my parents were fine with that. They would pick us up at the edge of town, or at the edge of the hospital grounds, and take us to the camping ground, and we would have a wonderful time. But one night I remember we were at the camping ground, and I remember my sister saying, boy, that kind of looks like Dad, but it can't be. As they came closer and got out of the car with the dog, I remember to this day, as though it happened yesterday, they walked up to the picnic table, and they just looked at each other, and my father and mother said, we want to meet your husband and we want to meet your son. And so they met, and everybody just started crying tears of joy. And my father said, that's it, pack everything up, you're coming back to the hospital, you'll stay in our guest room. And he proceeded, as a proud grandfather, to take his little grandson all throughout the hospital, introducing him to all the staff, to the patients, showing him off. And it was just an amazing reconciliation. It was just really one of the high points, just to experience that and to see how much courage it took on both their parts. I was living in Independence, Iowa, and I was in high school. Our high school, interestingly enough, between junior high and high school, there were only 200 students total. So it was a very, very small school. All throughout high school, we weren't allowed to go to the social activities because they didn't want us to associate with Gentiles. And I always liked music, and I always liked helping people. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go to a school that specializes in music. I applied to Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. It was a great school. It had a great reputation for music, and so I thought I'd start out in the field of music education. And I remember when I went away to college in the 60s, that's when the hippie movement was starting to come through, and it didn't take me long to meet the hippies on campus. I wanted to be understood, and I wanted to be accepted, because this group of people accepted me just as I was. They didn't care if I was Jewish. They didn't care about my background. Living this sheltered life, I remember different scenes in high school when the teacher would ask, "Why don't you talk about Rosh Hashanah?" And I would just want to go underneath my desk. I didn't want anybody to know that I was Jewish, that I was different. So that was really, really hard because the kids would make fun of me. So I guess when I went away to college, it was like a kid in a candy shop, you might say. I was just introduced to these people, and they just seemed to accept me right as I was, who I was. They didn't care that I was Jewish. They didn't care that I lived on the funny farm, as they used to call it. Nobody minded, and I was just totally accepted. I guess because of that, that just enabled me to move into that world, and I wanted people to know me. I wasn't sure who I was at the time, but I know that, I enjoyed sort of the hippie lifestyle because it was free. And, I didn't have to answer to anybody, and anything went, and there were no boundaries, and everybody got along. It was sort of like living in a fantasy world, I guess would be the best way to say it. I mean, I'm a party girl by nature. Everybody knows me to be Miss Social to this day. Every party I was invited to, I went. Every drug that was offered to me, I tried. And looking back, I just wanted to find myself. I really do believe that. But I felt that I had finally found a group of people that were accepting me. And that's why I so willingly entered into that world. But then whenever I'd go home, I'd have to just leave that behind and just become this nice little safe girl again. So that it was just an interesting conundrum to really live both of those worlds and live them fully. Because I'm the kind of person that embraces everything I do to the fullest. So when I was a hippie, I was a hippie. When I was home, I was home. So I was able to somehow manage that for a time. Everybody sort of gathered together, and they just would smoke weed, smoke grass. That was the first drug I tried. I guess it made me a little more philosophical, and it lowered inhibitions and all of that. I was living in the dorm, but at the same time, I was living in a hippie commune. So my parents were paying for the dorm and all the meals there. And then I was in the hippie commune doing the drugs. And after that, I got into some of the hallucinogenic drugs. And I had some pretty bad trips on what they would call acid, and where I just totally lost myself in the drug, and it would take me a few days to come down. So there were some pretty frightening experiences with the drugs. But in my mind, I always knew in the back of my mind this wasn't something I was going to do forever. I didn't really feel like I was a drug addict, because I would only use drugs if people gave them to me. When we were all together and everybody was doing them, I'd do them. When we weren't, I didn't. So it wasn't anything like I felt I had to have a drug. I enjoyed the experimentation part of it, and the acid, because it was just so visual, and I'm such a visual person, and I could see so much on that drug. And I remember thinking, oh my heavens, if my parents ever found out about this, that I was living this whole double life, I can't even imagine what they would do. And so that was really a time when I did feel very conflicted, because when I would come home, I would dress differently. I wasn't the hippie. As soon as I went back to college, I was the hippie again. So I was very conflicted during that time, because I remember thinking, boy, if my father ever found out about this, he would certainly disown me. How do I bring those worlds together? And eventually they came crashing together. Well, it was my freshman year, and the dorms were supposedly segregated, but that didn't matter because everybody broke the rules. And so this guy just came into the dorm, and he just laid down on top of me, and next thing you know, my clothes were off, and there was stuff all over, and I didn't even know what it was or what to do. Maybe my father, being that he was a doctor, would explain the birds and the bees to me, but he never did. I didn't even know how to react because I had no prior experience. So my roommate came in afterwards and had to explain to me everything that happened. I now know it was a rape, but at the time I didn't know it. And I was just horrified because I felt helpless, like I didn't even know what had happened. I know that sounds very strange coming from the daughter of a doctor and never having been taught anything. So yeah, that would be it. I just didn't know. I just thought, well, this is unusual. I just didn't have anything to pin it on. I didn't have anything to compare it to. I just didn't have any knowledge. And I was so naive. And then after that, it just seemed like nothing else mattered. So if I would get involved with a boy, a guy, you just went right into sex. I mean, there was no introductions. It's not hi, how are you? You just went right into sex. It was just very promiscuous, and it didn't matter who he was. And of course, I never ever used protection, ever, but I never ever thought I would get pregnant. So there was just this whole, fantasy life, where it wasn't the real world, and I was just in full force, and just whatever happened, happened. But it was interesting, once I got into the curriculum and I realized that music was going to become so much a part of my life, and I had to learn all this theory, which I hated. I hated the theory, and I had a really hard time grasping it. I thought, I just don't know if this is how I want to use my music. I want my music to be able to be fun, a part of my life. But I remember thinking, really what I wanted to do was something that had to do with therapy, something that had to do with helping people. And music, since it's such a universal language and everybody speaks it, I thought this would be a great career. So that's when I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to switch. And I decided to change to music therapy. And it was during a time, interestingly enough, when I was using drugs, and I didn't even remember sending in the application. So I was beginning to see through the veneer of the drug world, and I could see that it was just like numbing me and preventing me from maybe really being who I was. So as time went along, it was just wearing a little thin, and I could begin to see a lot of hypocrisy too among the hippies. They didn't want to accept anyone who wasn't a hippie. And so I remember there was a girl who had no place to live, and I wanted to bring her to the commune. Well, because she wasn't a hippie, they wouldn't let her in. And I just remember thinking, we're supposed to be about love? I don't think so. So I could just begin to see through everything that this was not real love. So I ended up going to Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and it was, I guess, my junior year. I was in the commune a lot and back and forth with the dorm in the commune, and continuing with the promiscuity, continuing not to take any protection whatsoever. And I was very heavy, and I didn't have any symptoms or anything, but of course some of the girls that were around me said, when was your last period? And I said, I guess it's been a while. And they said, well, you might want to go to the nurse and see if everything's okay, because you could be pregnant. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you haven't been using any protection. You could be pregnant. And I was just so stunned. I said, really? Never even occurred to me. I mean, the thought of being pregnant never even occurred to me. No one ever talked to me about that. So I didn't even know. I mean, it sounds so naive to say I didn't even know what to do. So I remember going to the nurse, and in those days it took a little longer to do a pregnancy test. It wasn't just like it is right now. You'd have to let things sit for a while. And I remember, when she called me in and she said, I have some news for you. I have to tell you you're pregnant. I remember just something in me flipped, a switch went off, and I started screaming at her at the top of my lungs. Every foul word in the book I threw at her, and I said, there's no way, there's no possible way, blah, 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 no way. And she said, well, here it is, you're pregnant. And I just didn't know what to do. I just didn't even know how to embrace it. So I remember going back to the commune, and I told everybody there what was going on. And they said, well, you can't, obviously you can't keep this baby. You're in no position to have a baby. And your family would freak out because, they're all about looking good. And if they had any idea you were pregnant, are you kidding me? And nobody talked to me about adoption plan. There was no ultrasound back then. There were no pregnancy centers back then. So I knew absolutely nothing. All I knew was that In the state that I was living in Michigan, abortion was not legal. It was before Roe versus Wade. It was in 1970. But there were certain states where abortion was legal, and one of those states was California. So they said you could go to California and you could get an abortion there. And I didn't have any idea how far along I was because I waited pretty long before I got the test. And I remember saying, okay, well, how are we going to do that? And everybody said, well, we'll sell things and we'll help you raise the money so that you can get out there and get on a plane. And they found out that there was this hotel that would house women who found themselves in unplanned pregnancy and help them to get an abortion. So I flew out to California near San Jose. And I went into this hotel, and they had me room with another girl that was pregnant. And I remember when I walked in, the proprietor of the hotel said, I just want to let you know that this should be a very rare occurrence, because back then abortion was looked upon very differently. It wasn't looked upon favorably. It was looked upon, you made this mistake and we're going to help you with it, but don't let it ever happen again. And I remember we had to go to San Francisco to the hospital to have the abortion, because I didn't know at that time that I was a lot further along. And I found out that I was well into my second trimester. And so the doctor explained to me, in those days they did an abortion procedure called a saline abortion, where sadly they actually burn the fetus within you, and then you have to deliver the dead baby, basically. And that was the kind of abortion I was going to be having. So I checked into the hospital, and I remember going into my room, and I remember the nurse, I remember she gave me this button, and she said, when the baby stops kicking, press the button and I'll come in to get the baby. So I remember hearing in the background, I could hear women screaming, "That's my baby, I want my baby, give me back my baby, I need my baby." And they were screaming in the background, and I was just trying to ignore all of that, because still I was kind of in this state of numbness and shock. I didn't even really know what was happening. And then I remember suddenly things stopped, and I clicked the button, and the nurse came in, and she said, "Okay," and I heard this plop, and she said, "Oh, you would have had a perfect baby boy." And at that moment, again, it went underground, because I did not remember her saying that until 27 years later. So I remember something happened in that moment, something shut down, and it was just like this event didn't happen. And as soon as I left the hospital and I got on the plane, I just remember just this myriad of feelings, and I just remember saying, I got to do more drugs. So I started taking more drugs, where I started to have nightmares and flashbacks, and doing more drugs and becoming promiscuous to hide the pain. And the other thing that was happening in my body is that I was feeling all this physical pain, and I didn't know why. I had no idea why. But I remember when I went back to Michigan and I went to the school nurse, she said, "Oh, well, we can't examine you because you're underage, you're under 21, and abortion is illegal in Michigan, and no doctor will see you without your parents' permission." And I knew that I was not ready to tell my parents that I was pregnant or had an abortion. So I called my sister, who was living in Connecticut at the time, and I told her what happened. And she said, "I'll tell you what, why don't you just come out to Connecticut and we'll help you. We'll help you get set up with a doctor and make sure that everything's okay." And the pain was getting worse. The flashbacks were getting worse. I was failing in my major class, which was a music class where I had to perform a piece of music, and I lost my memory and I couldn't perform it, so they flunked me for the year. So I just said, I have to just drop out of college. I can't do this anymore. So I did, and I went out to Connecticut, and I remember when I came out there, no doctor would examine me. So my sister said, your only option is to call mom and dad and tell them what happened. And by that time, I was so numb. I had this whole wall built around me, so that if my father were to reject me or whatever he would do, it wouldn't matter, because I was just numb. So I said, I guess I have nothing to lose. And I remember, picking up the phone and calling him and saying, "Daddy, I just have to let you know that I'm a hippie, that I was doing drugs, that I was living in a commune, and I found myself pregnant, and I just had an abortion." And there was a moment of silence, and he said, you're no use to us anymore. You might as well just be dead. And he just slammed the phone down. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there and I thought, well, I kind of figured this would happen. But then about 5 minutes later, the phone rang again, and it was my father calling back, and he said, no, you know what? I love you. You're still our daughter, and we're going to help you. And I'm going to send your mother out to the East Coast, and she's going to help you get the help that you need. And just know I love you. And the moment my father said the words, I love you, all that physical pain that I had in my body that was getting worse and worse and worse, totally left immediately as soon as he said those words, I love you. Totally gone. My father gave permission for me to go into the hospital. They did an exam. They said the abortion was fine. There was no problems whatsoever. It was pain that I was holding because of the fear that I had of my father not loving me if he were to find out the truth about me. So that was a very pivotal time in my life, because I thought to myself, wow, you know, if my father could accept me after all these terrible things, it was kind of a prototype of years later when I would come to believe that Jesus, Yeshua, could accept me in spite of all of my sins and all the terrible things that I did unconditionally. When my father said those words, I love you, you know, I felt this freedom. I felt like a lot of the numbness that I had been carrying all those years was just sort of melting away. And I began to feel a little bit of hope. I was still very, very depressed and not happy at all, but I just began to feel a glimmer of hope. Even though he acts like he's the strong one, I don't really think he is. And I think that he felt it would be better for my mother to come, and she actually was really strong, and she wasn't too nice, and it was really hard to be with her in many ways. We were never close. My mother was emotionally distant, so we never really had a close relationship, and so I wasn't thrilled that she was coming, but I figured, well, whatever. But my father did make arrangements for us to meet with one of the top psychiatrists in New York. So there wasn't much hope from his standpoint that I was ever going to be better. And so I guess he figured it would be easier to send my mother. But interestingly enough, when my mother came, you know, when we met with the psychiatrist, I remember at that moment feeling so much shame in his office. I remember walking in, it was a beautiful office, big office, and this doctor, you know, sat behind the desk. And I was expecting to be beat up in every way emotionally. And my mother kept saying, you know, I don't know how she could have done this to us. I don't know how she could hurt our family like this. How could she do this? How could she could do that? And, you know, I was just feeling like I wanted to go down underneath the floor. But all of a sudden, I heard the psychiatrist say to my mother, would you mind stepping out of the room? I'd like to speak to your daughter alone. So she said, okay. So I remember her walking out of the room, and I can still picture it. And he looked at me with tender eyes, and he said, how are you feeling right now? I mean, no one really ever asked me that. And I said, scared, overwhelmed. I don't know what to feel. And he said, well, I'm concerned about you, and I want to make sure that you get all the help that you need. And one of the things that I think is very important, and your father's not going to like this, but I'm going to talk to him as a psychiatrist to a psychiatrist. I want you to be as far away from them as possible. I want you to undergo very intensive psychodynamic therapy. I have a wonderful doctor in Connecticut I can refer you to. But I want you to be as far away from them as possible, because you don't know who you are apart from them, and you have to find yourself. I mean, everything in me was just like, wow, somebody's actually in my corner. I couldn't believe it. I was just shocked. And he said, but I don't want you mentioning anything to your mother. And my aunt and uncle lived in West Hartford, Connecticut, and we were very, very close to them. And in many ways, I was closer to that family than I was my own family. And my aunt and uncle, without hesitation, said, of course she can stay here. Of course she can live here. And I remember, starting the therapy, and I still can picture walking into that doctor's office for the first time, and he sat behind this big, dark desk, and he kind of looked like my father. And the idea is that in that kind of therapy, the psychiatrist becomes your transference. In other words, that psychiatrist was going to become my father, and he was going to be my safe place to begin to get better, to begin to express all the hurt, all the anger, everything that was just held so deeply within would come out in this therapy. And the doctor says very little. You just walk in and you start doing your work. You just start talking, and he maybe guides you a little bit here and there, but no niceties, no how are you, just right into the work. But the goal was I was going to need to confront my father. And I knew in my heart I would have to eventually do this, but I didn't know how it could possibly happen. The psychiatrist prepared me for is 1 year. In 1 year, you will be prepared to confront your father. He would be flying out to Connecticut. What do I have to lose? I really don't have anything to lose. I feel like I lost everything. So I remember going out into the porch, and I can just still see him sitting there, just looking very serious. And I said, you know, Dad, I have to tell you the truth. I have to tell you how terribly sad I am and disappointed and hurt about the way that you treated us, especially Esther, but me too. You were not a loving father. You were mean, and I felt like totally controlled by you. I felt like I never had a life. And I have to say to you that that's over. We cannot do this anymore. I'm changing. I'm growing up. I'm stepping away. I'm my own person. And I said, and the first thing that I want to ask you to do is to help me. I said, my friends all chipped in to help me get the abortion. They don't have any money. They sold everything. I want to ask you to loan me the money so that I can send them the checks and pay them back, and I will pay you back. And he actually said, okay. And he went in the house and asked for some envelopes and stamps, and I had the addresses. And this was a moment of wonderful levity that I'll never forget. He said, why don't we walk to the mailbox together? Well, both my father and I are directionally challenged, and that neighborhood, everything looks alike. All the houses look alike. All the streets look alike. So we were walking to where we thought the mailbox was, and about an hour later, my mother and aunt come driving in their car looking for us, and they couldn't find us. We were totally lost. So it was just like one of those moments, where we just connected just as two human beings, in a moment of laughter, and suddenly realizing that we're both human, that we're both really human. And that was it. But I just felt like it was, for me, a whole new beginning. At that moment, there was a burst of freedom, and that I could finally be my own person. As time was moving along and the therapy was going maybe from 3 times a week to 2 times a week, it was decided that, I should get a job, and I did start to work in this place. It was kind of a factory. It was a Corelware factory, and I would be sort of a Girl Friday, in other words, a receptionist. And I remember, I was in the factory, and one day I saw this guy come in, and I thought, wow, he's cute. And I had somebody get some information for me, and I knew he liked to drink coffee. At the time I didn't, but I pretended I did. And I had a boyfriend, but I didn't really like him. And I was making my mind up that I was going to kick him out. So I remember meeting Dave, and something just clicked, and I just knew that I was supposed to be with him. And I said, Dave, why don't you come up and see me sometime? The May West. And I gave him my address, and I somehow believed that he would actually show up that night. So I remember when I got home, I kicked the other guy out. I said, take your blankety stereo and get out of my house. And he did. He screeched away and took the stereo, and that was it. And 2 hours later, Dave showed up. And it was just like, I guess maybe because we came from similar backgrounds, and we were both coming out of the hippie lifestyle, and we found each other at the right time. I guess we could almost say it was love at first sight, because we just bonded. We just became best friends immediately. And he came from a background where there was physical and emotional abuse and alcoholism, and his father was a compulsive gambler. So there was a lot of history there as well. I just loved him, and we just knew we were going to be together, and I knew that one day we would probably be married. It was about 2.5 years into the therapy when I suddenly started to feel like it was time to end the therapy, and that I had to move on with my life. And I decided I wanted to go back to college, and I wanted to complete my bachelor's degree and have a career, because that was important to me. But I knew that my parents wouldn't fund it, because I dropped out of my own volition, and I knew they would not fund for me to go back to school, so that would be up to me to get the loan. I applied to 2 schools, one in the state of Washington, Seattle, and the other Mankato, Minnesota, with a degree in therapeutic recreation and music as a minor, because I figured I could use the recreation therapy to help people and also still use my music. So it seemed like a perfect fit. So I applied to both schools, and the first one that accepted me was Mankato State College. So I remember saying to Dave, "Do you want to go out west with me, young man?" And he had never left home. He'd always lived at home with his family, and he wasn't too happy being there because it was very dysfunctional. And he didn't hesitate, and he said, "Yes, let's get out of here." And we ended up, in Mankato, and we were able to find this place to rent. And again, in those days, it wasn't looked upon favorably not to be married. So even when we went to rent a place, they were not happy that we weren't married, but they agreed to rent it to us anyway. And I was going to work in a Holiday Inn and as a waitress in the morning before I went to school. And Dave was trying to get a job, but in those days, they didn't like hippies. He had hair in those days, and it was out to here. And, he just didn't look the part. And so there would be, a sign in the window, "Help Wanted," and he would apply for the job. And as soon as he walked in, they'd say the job was taken. The next day, he'd see the same sign in the window. So no one would hire him until such time when he ended up in the Shakey's Pizza Parlor. And they said, "Well, if you stay in the back room watching pizza pans, you can have this job." But it was a hard time because there was still a lot of angst and unrest, and we were both angry people. We were both middle children. We held the pain. We were fighting a lot, so it wasn't necessarily a happy time. There were times that, Dave might use a little too much alcohol, or, I wasn't doing any drugs at that time, but it was just not a great time. And by that time I had graduated from college. I had my degree, and that's where I started working in this agency to try to help kids not go down the road of drugs. And there I met someone that I was drawn to, and she seemed to have all this joy. And I just thought to myself, I have to get to know this woman. I have to get to know this woman. And she just had so much joy. And when I went to call her, she had given me her number. Her roommate, it was like on a Friday night, and her roommate said, "Well, you know what? She's down at a local Catholic church. Maybe you can meet her there." And I remember something inside of me said, "You have to go to that Catholic church. You have to ask Dave if he'll go with you." Even though Dave was brought up Catholic, he did not want to go to a Catholic church. But I thought, we don't really have anything to lose. So I said to Dave, "Would you be willing to go down to this Catholic church so that we could meet this woman?" So we walk into this room, and there was a gospel group. I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but there was a gospel group up front, and everybody in the audience had their hands raised, and they were all singing songs about Jesus. And I remember looking around, and, we looked very hippie-like, me with my bell bottoms and my part in the middle and my long hair, and Dave with his hair out to here. But people accepted us. They accepted us and loved us, and nobody turned us away. And they just said, "You're welcome here. We're so glad you're here." And there were people from every denomination there. And what it was a Catholic charismatic prayer meeting. And it was pretty unbelievable because we just looked at each other and we said, maybe what we're missing in our lives is God. Maybe that's what we're missing. And we were just drawn. We were just drawn to it. We didn't know what to do because we were, we never sang songs about Jesus or anything about God, but we were just drawn. Someone said, "Would you like to pray to receive Jesus as your Messiah? Would you like to pray to receive him into your life?" And we learned a little bit more about him, and I thought to myself, well, I'm Jewish. I don't know how that will go. But somebody happened to feel from the Lord to bring a brochure that night to the prayer meeting that said Jews for Jesus. I didn't even know there was such a thing as Jews for Jesus, because again, we were taught that Jews don't believe in Jesus. So I saw that and I went, okay. Growing up, I remember going to the synagogue, and there would be readings from the Old Testament every week. From the front, the rabbi would do some readings.
ישעיהו נ"ג, פסוק 1. Who has believed our report? To whom is the arm of the Adonai revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty, that we should look at him, nor beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we did not esteem him.
And there would be like Isaiah 52 and then Isaiah 54. And I always wondered why they left out Isaiah 53. And one time I actually asked the rabbi, I was curious, even as a young girl, I was curious. And he said, well, it's because people think it's all about Jesus, but it really isn't. It's all about Israel, and I'm tired of having to explain it. So I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. But I never forgot that. That kind of stayed in my mind. And so it gave me sort of an innate curiosity about what that book was really about and why it was hidden.
Surely, he has borne our griefs and carried our pains. Yet, we esteemed him stricken, struck by God, afflicted. But he was pierced because of our transgression, crushed because of our iniquities. The chastisement of our shalom was upon him, and by his stripes we were healed.
Over the years, that's what happens if you go to Israel and you open up Holy Scriptures. Isaiah 53 isn't even in their Bible. So this just completely left out. When it was brought to me, and my friend who shared the Lord with me read it to me, I thought she was reading to me from the New Testament. But when she said, no, this is from your Holy Scriptures, this is from the Old Testament, I couldn't believe it. I was just shocked. And I said, well, that sounds just like Jesus, everything he said he would do. So for me, it just came full circle. And I was just like, yeah, that's totally Yeshua. So I think, it's a mystery that only God can reveal and will reveal when people are ready. And then, of course, there's so many prophecies. If you read the Bible from beginning to end in the Old Testament, there are so many prophecies that lead to Jesus as being the Messiah. But again, I just feel like the blinders are on people's eyes until such time that they're open and ready, and the Lord will remove those blinders.
Nigash v'hu na'aneh. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, like a sheep before his shearers, is silent. So he did not open his mouth. Mi yisokheach, ki nigzar me'eretz chaim. Yet it pleased Adonai to bruise him. He caused him to suffer. If he makes his soul a guilt offering, he will see his offspring. He will prolong his days. And the will of the Adonai will succeed by his hand. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will sit and be satisfied by his knowledge. The righteous one, my servant, will make many righteous, and he will bear their iniquities.
So when we were given the invitation, we got on our knees together and we prayed to receive Jesus as our Messiah, August 4th, 1974. And just after we said the prayer, I started weeping, just weeping tears of joy. And I just couldn't stop crying tears of joy. Nothing could stop. And someone had a word, and the word was, Goldie, your gift is the gift of joy. That is the gift the Lord has given you. And this joy just came rushing through my body. And that scripture is 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, old things have passed away and all things have become new. And that's exactly what happened. And I just felt like a totally new creation. And this joy just filled me. And I started to speak Hebrew. I never learned Hebrew because I never went to Hebrew school. I was never bat mitzvahed. But there was a nun there who understood what I was saying in Hebrew. And I was saying, thank you for being my long-lost Messiah, Yeshua. Thank you. And I was saying this in Hebrew, and I've never been able to speak it again. It was just a sign, because it says the Jew requires a sign, and that was my sign, speaking Hebrew. And I never questioned it for a moment. Like in the drug world, I questioned a lot. But as soon as he came into my life, and I saw how real he was and how much he loved me and how he forgave me for all my sinful behavior, just like that, I just thought, there's no way there could be anything other than this. And so I never turned back, even though it was going to be hard, even though my family wasn't going to understand me for believing in Jesus as a Jew. I didn't care. I just didn't care, because I was blind and now I see. And that's what was important to me. And I was going to just be able to share that with whoever the Lord would open the doors for me to share with. And even though it was going to be hard with my own family, it was worth the risk. Because when you wake up one day and you know you're totally different and you're totally forgiven, and you leave darkness into light, there's nothing anybody can say or do to change that.
Oh Lord, I'm coming home.
Once we came to know Yeshua, Jesus, as our Messiah, we knew that, we needed to be married. And we found this little church that we went to, and the pastor was very kind, and he said, we're going to really help you two to grow. And then we knew that we needed to be married. So this was August, and by November 23rd of that same year, we were going to be married. And we didn't know exactly how that would happen, but we did tell my parents, and they weren't thrilled, but they agreed that they would come out to Minnesota, and that we could be married by the justice of the peace, because at that time there was no rabbi or no priest that would marry a mixed couple, and so the justice of the peace was the only answer. So I remember when we walked into the room, and the justice of the peace had these funny looking glasses, I still remember them, and we had to give him our marriage licenses. So my father said, "Hey Janie, this thing is a lot easier to get into than it is to get out of. Are you sure you want me to pay the man the $10? So that's what I mean. At times he had the greatest sense of humor. And I said, "Well, Daddy, that's not a very good vote of confidence in our marriage, but yes, I'd like you to pay the man the $10, please." So he did. And afterwards, it was kind of cute. We walked out. My mother threw rice, and we had a friend of ours as a witness who was a photographer. And so she took a couple pictures, and then they had a reception for us at the Holiday Inn, at the top of the Holiday Inn, where we had, a lovely dinner and a cake. And then they put Dave and I up in the hotel as their gift to us. So it was actually, really special that they could see that we were doing the right thing, and that we were determined to be together. So the fact that they did that for us, I think, said a lot. It really did. Because I was going against the grain so much in my life, obviously believing in Jesus and accepting him into my life as my personal Messiah would be kind of the final big breaking point. And it was hard to think about that, because I feel like I was on good state with my father, and to have to just mess up the apple cart a little bit would be another very difficult thing to have to navigate. But at the same time, there was something within me that said, this is so real. What you experience with Yeshua, with Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, is so real that there was nothing that anybody could say to take it away from me. So I felt at this stage of my life that there was a strength from above that was coming into my life and into my heart, so that it wouldn't be me that would have to be facing my Father this time. It would be Yeshua, Jesus in me, going with me, so that I would know I was not alone. And as long as he wasn't going to reject me, even if my father did, it would be okay. I always knew I wanted to help people in some way, and I was able to go back to school and get my degree, but I wasn't sure exactly where it would be and what would happen. And the Lord just kind of put in our lives some people that lived in the Philadelphia area that we became very close to, and there was a very large Messianic Jewish congregation in Philadelphia. And so they eventually said to us, "You know what? You belong in our congregation. It's such a wonderful congregation. People are there from all over the world." That was a big move, because we'd lived in Minnesota 11 years, and we'd gotten to know many people and became very close to many, many people that we're still very close to this day. And it was a very painful move, but somehow we just knew the Lord was leading us to the Philadelphia area. And while we were there, there was a lot of things that were happening. When Dave and I first met, one of the things we both agreed on very wholeheartedly is that we would never have children, because we both came from such dysfunctional families. We just didn't think that we were equipped to be parents. Nothing in us felt we could do that. So we agreed. We sort of made that pact. But then once we got to the congregation, and I was seeing these beautiful couples, and they were getting married, and then they started having children, because we were there 28 years all told. And something started to change in my heart. All of a sudden, overnight, everything in me wanted to have a baby. But I kept thinking, but wait a minute, I never wanted to have a child. What's going on here? Why would I be suddenly having this desire? But it was so strong. It was just so strong. And so I talked to Dave about it, and he just wasn't in the same place. He couldn't bring himself to say, let's have a baby. But he did agree to go for therapy. So at the time, I was a very good manipulator, and I managed to find a therapist that he agreed to meet with, who was someone who didn't want to have a child, but then eventually changed and did have a child. He went for therapy for a year, and the therapist was wonderful, and she ended up saying to him at the end of the therapy, "You're on a plane, and you have the choice to walk out on the wing and skydive or walk back into the cockpit. What is it going to be for you?" And Dave said, "I have to walk back into the plane." And he did. And he came home and he told me that he could not have a baby. And at that point, everything in me just started to collapse. I just thought my life was over. I'd recently lost a job that I loved, and I felt like I had nothing. I didn't have a career. I didn't have an identity. I wasn't a mother. I was nothing. And I just felt so broken and so lost. And I didn't even know what to say. But I remember one night, we lived in a row home at the time, and when you looked up, there was an awning without the awning, just the poles. And I remember looking up and I saw all the stars in the sky, and I felt the presence of the Lord so strongly. And he said to me, "Goldie, do you see all those stars in the sky? I love you more than all those stars in the sky. Do you think it will really matter if you get to heaven one day and you don't have a baby?" He said, "Well, you could continue going down the path of manipulating and trying to get Dave to go along with you. But do you really want your Hagar? Is that what you really want? Do you really want to see him destroyed? Is that what you really want?" And I said, "No, Lord." And at that point, I just started weeping and weeping and weeping, and I couldn't stop crying. I was just like uncontrollable sobbing, because I feel like I was letting go of the deepest desire of my life, that I would not have a baby. I just would not have a baby. And finally, when I got done sobbing, I went into the house and I saw Dave like this at the dining room table with his head in his hands. And I just thought, I can't do this to him. So I went up to him and I said, "Dave, we don't have to have a baby. It's okay. It's okay. I can't do this to you. I just can't do this to you." And he just broke and I broke. And we just held each other in each other's arms for probably an hour and just wept together. Just wept together, because everything in Dave wanted to give me a baby, but he just didn't think he could move past his dysfunction, which in many ways was far worse than mine. And I could just see how much he loved me, and that's what I really needed to sustain me. Because if he loved me, even not being able to give me the deepest desires of my heart, I was going to be okay. We were going to be okay. Nothing was going to come between us. So it was in that brokenness that I really believe the Lord began to work. And I remember we went forward for prayer one night in the congregation, and Rabbi David and his wife were there, and they prayed for us. And we shared with them that we made this decision. And David had this word, and he said, "You know, Goldie, I have this feeling that you're going to be a mom to many one day. I just want to say that to you. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I feel to tell you that." Well, my father retired from the hospital in 1978, and they decided to go to Arizona to retire. It was really a very hard transition for my father, because his whole life was wrapped up in his work and what he did, and he was Dr. Corson, and everybody looked up to him. I think that probably was the time when he began to reflect and began to look at his life and began to see, wow, I did all these things, but does it really matter now? He felt like he had no identity. I remember I had one talk with him when I went down to visit. "Janie, I'm a nobody, I'm a nothing, nobody knows me as Dr. Corson, nobody cares." And I said, "But Daddy, it doesn't have anything to do with what you do. It's all about who you are. It's all inside. I just really feel you have to take this up with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You have to take it up with him." And that was a pretty big step for me to even say that, but I felt I needed to. I guess it was, 70, but close to 1988. My father had 10 years of retirement, and then he became sick. He had heart problems, and he wasn't taking care of himself. He could have had a simple bypass surgery, but we found all this chocolate in his pockets, and he, wasn't compliant or doing the right thing. It's almost like he didn't want to live anymore. And one thing led to the other, and he had a couple small heart attacks and then a big heart attack. And then, my mom called and said, you better get down to Arizona. I don't know how much longer he'll be here. So I got on a plane, as I was on the plane, I felt the presence of the Lord really strongly. I had a little notebook, and I wrote this down, and I felt the Lord say to me, "Your father will not perish until he has a chance to see Yeshua as his Messiah." So I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So I wrote that down. So I remember, we landed and I walked into his room and he was attached to all these machines. And so I just kept praying over him. And then he kind of rallied back, and my mother said, "Well, why don't you go back home? Because, there's nothing more you can do, and he seems to be getting a little better." Well, meanwhile, my sister Esther, when she made it, my father by that time was starting to decline again. And she said she was sitting at his bedside, and all of a sudden he looked up at her and he said, with just this real soft warmth in his voice, "Wait until you see Yeshua." And he closed his eyes and breathed his last breath. And my sister said there was just such peace in the room, and there was such peace on his face. And then when my mother came in, she said, "I've never seen your father look this peaceful in the 49 years that I've known him." And it's as though he saw something. And so Esther said, "Well, he may very well have." And then my sister didn't know that I'd been given that word on the plane until 9 months later I had the chance to meet her. So it was just such an amazing confirmation and such an amazing moment that we both knew that, wow, all of our prayers have been answered. I mean, he has his own story of redemption. My sister Esther was always a fighter, and she was determined not to let her horrible childhood interfere with the rest of her life. And she didn't. She's always been optimistic and loves to laugh. She came to know Yeshua in 1975, and in 1976, at his direction, moved to Israel, arriving as one of the first Jewish believers in the country. The Lord called her to a total life of faith, depending on him for direction and provision. And she wrote a book sharing adventures with him that has been published in 7 languages and encouraged people around the world to trust the Lord in a real way and to understand his love for Israel and the Jewish people. So then that led my mother on a search, and she said, I have to know more about this Yeshua. So she came up to Philadelphia and she visited our congregation, and she fell in love with everybody, and she interviewed everybody. And she said, "I don't know, all my life I was told not to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but I never bothered to question it. But," she said, "after coming to your congregation and talking to all these people, he seems very real to me." And 6 months later, she called me the night before my birthday, and my sister Esther was going to be coming to visit her from Jerusalem. She said, "You know what? I think I'm one of you. I believe in Jesus. I believe in Yeshua. Would you pray with me to receive him as my Lord and Savior?" So I led her in a prayer of salvation. And then she lived 7 more years in the Lord before she died. And I just know that, the testimony that we are to our families, we just have no idea how the Lord is working on their hearts, because it's all about the heart. We moved forward, and I eventually went back to school, and I got my master's degree in social work, graduated in 1993, worked in private practice for a while in a Christian counseling center, and then in January of 1997, I was offered a job as a client services director in a pregnancy center. We called them in the day Crisis Pregnancy Center. And I wasn't so sure I wanted to take the job because I had a full practice. I had like 30, 35 clients, and I wasn't sure how I was going to let go of them and make the transition to this. But as I was telling Dave, and Dave is a very gentle person and he's not confrontational at all, but I heard him say to me, "You know what, I think if you don't take this job, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life." So I remember going for the interview, and they had me meet the board of directors, and the president of the board said to me, Why do you think you want to work here at Amnion Pregnancy Center?" And all of a sudden I started sobbing, like wrenching sobbing, and my abortion just came rising up to the surface. I had an abortion 27 years ago, and if I could stop even one person from having an abortion, then I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to do that. I want to make a difference. I don't want somebody to make the same mistake I made. And I thought for sure they weren't going to hire me because I was such a crybaby. And I went home, and later that night the phone rang, and it was 10:30 at night. And the executive director called and she said, we talked about it, and she said, I want to offer you the job as a client services director. I think you will be perfect for this job. So I knew at that moment that's what I needed to do. And I almost felt at that moment that God was giving me my calling. He was saying, though you lost your baby, through that I can redeem your life. I can use you to help so many other women who will be in the same position as you if you're just willing to share your story. If you're just willing to share your story. And so before I could actually work seeing the clients, I was told I had to go through the post-abortion Bible study myself. And we got to the point in the Bible study where I had to say out loud that I ended the life of my baby. Well, I couldn't stop weeping. I was on the floor, like my baby had been just torn from me. And I just couldn't stop sobbing. And it was at that moment the memory came back. You would have had a perfect baby boy. And it just came back at that moment. And I was just there's no words to describe what I was feeling at that moment, just devastated. How could I have done this? How could I have ended the life of my baby? How could I have done this? And then I started to blame myself. That's why I'm not going to have children. That's why all these things are happening. And I knew, in time, the Lord doesn't work that way. He doesn't hold something over you and say, you did this, so you're not going to have that. And so I made it through the end of the Bible study, and at the end they had a memorial service. And in the memorial service, you have the opportunity to name your baby so that you can put closure. And in the Jewish religion, you take the first letter of your father's name. And so since my father's name was Selig, I decided to name my baby Samuel, which is God is with him. And I remember going home and I showed the certificate to Dave. And this is the kind of person Dave is. He looked at the certificate and he said, Goldie, I want to adopt your baby in heaven. I want to adopt your baby so that we will be parents together one day. I love you. And I want us to be parents to your baby Samuel. And I just felt in that moment that was just such a gift from the Lord, that he was just saying, maybe your story didn't turn out the way you wanted it to be, but there's a greater purpose. There's a much greater purpose than you can see right now. You have to just trust me. You just have to trust me. And then I started working at Amnion, and I started meeting with women who were on the throes of what they were going to be doing about their pregnancies. And I was able to share my story. And as I was sharing my story, so many of the women who were just bent on having abortions, many of them would change their hearts. They would change their minds. Because I would say, abortion isn't the quick, easy fix you think it is. It just isn't. We women are born to nurture life. And when you make a decision to end a life, that doesn't go with who we are and who God created us to be. So there were so many opportunities. And then the Lord brought back to my mind the word that the Lord had given Rabbi David, and that was, Goldie, you will be a mom to many. And that's when I began to see my ministry unfolding. And I began to see over the years of working at Amnion and at other pregnancy centers. And then we moved to Florida in 2011. I started working at First Care. And now here I am again in the counseling room, sitting in front of women who are in the throes of considering abortions, sharing my story and saying there's a better way and we can help you. There wasn't a pregnancy center in my day, but we have them now all over the country, and they're all there to help women make a choice for life. That's my ministry, that's my passion, that's what I'm committed to, and I'm so grateful that even in my later years, I'm still able to be a mom to many, and I can see many, many babies that I'll one day meet in heaven along with my own baby. Somebody said this to me the other day, that she felt like the Lord had placed me on this earth to be an encourager, to be someone who brings hope to other people. And I've kind of known that ever since I've come to know the Lord, by my telling my story, by my willing to be vulnerable, by my willing, to do whatever it takes to let people know that hope is out there, that we can move past these difficult things, that we can live a life of joy and freedom and surrender. My message now is surrender. Surrender it all. And when you do, you'll see the Lord working and moving in your life in ways that you would never have imagined. And that's what I feel this next stage of my life is about, is going out there and talking to as many people as I can, sharing my story and talking about what it really means when we do surrender. because when I finally did surrender my painful past to the Lord, which was just before my 65th birthday, it was at that moment that all the fog that I had a lot of fog in my brain for all my life that wasn't enabling me to really move forward. I couldn't really think clearly, see clearly. Everything was just going through this fog. Well, once I totally and completely surrendered my painful past to the Lord, that fog lifted, and I was able to focus again in a way that I'd never been able to focus before, and everything looked clear and felt clearer, and it's just been such a newfound freedom. You know, I can have a video camera and I can just have the lens like this, and then I can just see you. But then I can choose to expand the lens and I can see the whole room and I can see everything around me. Well, that's what I like to think about the eternal perspective, that's what the Lord wants us to have, is that backdrop of eternity, so that we know that everything we do and everything we experience has a greater purpose and greater meaning. I'd like to give you an opportunity to receive Jesus, Yeshua, as your Messiah. Just like I did 48 years ago. It was the best decision of my life, one that I've never turned back on. I want you to have the same opportunity. So I'm going to say a prayer, and I'd like to ask that you repeat it after me. And please let me know. There'll be contact information. I would love to hear from you if you've made this decision. So, dear Yeshua, Jesus, I ask you to come into my life, to be my Lord and Savior. I ask that you would forgive me for all my sins. And I recognize that I'm a sinner. And I know I need you, Lord. So please come into my life. Be my Lord and Savior. Just help me every day of my life to love you, to be obedient to you, to do whatever it is you want me to do with my life. And I completely dedicate my heart and my life to you. And I pray this in Yeshua's very precious name. Amen.
Another day, another breath, a shadow of a life. Fighting not to feel this pain inside. What can I do? What can I say to make this suffering go away? If you're really here, stay, please don't leave. Show me now, 'cause I want to believe. Just like a rainbow in the night, out of the darkness I will rise. Your colors are so beautiful, miraculous and wonderful. In radiance I'll rise, in radiance I'll rise. When thunder roars, I'll let it be. There'll be 1,000 angels watching over me. When rain is pouring on my face, I'll be dancing unafraid, surrounded by your light. Rainbow in the night, rainbow in the night. Same old story, every page revised. Once unloved, now treasured as your child. You